Good afternoon and good evening, everybody, and welcome to this special SHRM Masterclass on creating a culture of diversity and inclusion through digital coaching in partnership with Coach Hub. Well, culture and inclusion are critical elements in creating a learning environment. The positive impact of DE&I on businesses can be transformational when individuals from different backgrounds and experiences collaborate at the workplace. There is a real need to create cultural competence, which allows employees to feel safe while having vulnerable conversations. A lack of cultural competence can create an us versus them kind of a feeling, which obviously doesn't really work well in organizations where coaching conversations then get rejected. When there is a lack of awareness of the diversity that is present within an organization, often at times a more reactive approach is adopted. With belongingness, empowerment, fairness, and respect becoming essential factors for the success of DNI, digital coaching is one of the most effective change management tools and can, in fact, be more effective than classroom training, e-learning modules, and one-on-one sessions with senior leaders. So in our masterclass today, we are going to delve into aspects of understanding how to make the most of digital coaching and how to leverage that to create an ideal culture of diversity and inclusion. And I have with me our facilitator for this session. So let me introduce and welcome to the session Naila Abdul Karim, Senior Behavioral Scientist at Coach Hub. And I'm Archana Jerath. I'm Director of Operations for APAC, Middle East, and India for SHRM. And to tell you a little bit about Naila's background before I hand over to her for this masterclass, Naila is a Senior Behavioral Scientist at Coach Hub. Her key mission is to connect science with practice while leveraging psychology, coaching, research, and business expertise every day to create the best, most evidence based solutions. She's deeply passionate about people development and enabling products that help people navigate their career and life through achieving their goals while unlocking their ultimate potential. Well, Naila, it's a pleasure to have you here today as our expert on this very, critical masterclass on driving, creating a culture of DNI through digital coaching. And we look forward to a very engaging session with you. With that, let me hand over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Ashana, for such a warm welcome. Indeed, I do have a meaty topic, quite a big one, quite an important one, and ever essential one as days progress in the time and age we are present and working. So thank you so much. Good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining this session. Thank you for being a part of this webinar. And I would like to invite you on a journey where I would like to unpack a bit more around how to create a culture of diversity and inclusion through digital coaching. And as I mentioned, it's a meaty topic, so I would try my best to share some of my scientific adventure over the course of a few years in this area. And please feel free to pop in all the curious burning questions you have, and we'll find some time at the end of the session today to take some of those. So now let's get into some of the core topics that I would like to cover in today's session. And that would be to, basically like check under the hood and kind of understand what's the ground realities around diversity and inclusion in the region, and then kind of unpacking why does inclusion matter in this entire equation, because we do hear quite a bit on diversity and usually inclusion is tagged along, but what's the importance of this and why does it really matter than ever? And then I would be unpacking a bit more about how digital coaching then can be a fantastic tool in all of our toolboxes to create the culture of diversity and inclusion. And I would do a bit of a pit stop by Coach Hub's diversity and inclusion framework to give a bit more of context. And last, I would like to nicely wind up in sharing some of the next steps that potentially you could take to making, to beefing up your existing DNI framework, or to even start off something new for your organization. And as I said, I would open up the floor, hopefully, for some more questions by the end of this today's session. Now, On that note, with no further ado, maybe a little bit about Coach Hub before I start. We are from Coach Hub. Coach Hub is a global coaching company, and we offer high quality coaching at scale. And our core mission is to democratize coaching across all career levels worldwide. And on that note, I would like to get a sensing of the floor, and I'm quite curious on what you think about. Is diversity and inclusion a relevant topic for your organizational success? As we all have been hearing about this, there has been so much research, there's been so much movement, a lot of amazing organizations putting out some of their findings and reports out there. So I'm quite curious to see what your thoughts are. Please take the time to, pop in your response into the poll. It would be nice to see what the floor is thinking about this topic. Let's give it a minute. Please feel free to drop in your responses. Let's give that a few more seconds to get all of you to just choose your responses. Would be interesting to see what are we thinking on this. Great. The poll has been closed. Can we see how the poll results look? Wow, we do have a smashing one of 87%. And we do have a fairly round about 13% not yet, but I think there's a great opportunity in making it to a potential yes. And I hope by the end of today's session, I draw some sort of inspiration for one of you to pick that and continue that work across with the organization. All right, now having kind of felt the sense in the room, let's see what research have to say around how diversity and inclusion impacts organization. And we have a fantastic study done by McKinsey that says diversity and inclusion does bring in fantastic and new perspective. It kind of opens the horizon further when you have the diverse and inclusive space within your teams. And this also kind of avoids the group think phenomena. And I'm sure every one of us in our call at some point in our careers that we might have been privy to grouping where we are part of a group and decisions are made and not really aligned to what we think and feel, and it's not necessarily always validated. So this is something happens when there is not much empowerment around diversity, where different ideas are openly welcome, whereas you're also feeling part of a larger team. So having more diverse and inclusive space does definitely warrant for added perspective and avoid of grouping. But it also, at the same time, having that space increases that creativity and innovation. And we have seen this happen several, and a lot of organizations have testament to this particular piece, where I remember reading up on Netflix trying to put up a study of inviting data coders to break a particular code, and to their surprise, it was a competition that didn't really work, because a lot of things, when they start analyzing their teams, the team started to look very homogeneous. And the moment they kind of tweaked that mix, they started inviting more diverse people into the equation. It was interesting that the most diverse team did end up winning that particular breaking the code contest. So this itself is a reflection of, perhaps how, bringing more diverse, different, experiences into a mix have impact. And of course, this then starts trickling into more improved financial performance that we have definitely seen. And also recently I came across a lovely quote by the CEO of Banyan Tree, who said, they are quite they find the need to have an inclusive workspace as imperative, because this gives them indeed a competitive edge. And as a global hospitality group, it takes pride in itself being, to be able to offer exceptional experience to all their guests. And they kind of affirm that, Banyan Tree as a hospitality chain would not be able to deliver that promise without having motivated, innovative, and creative teams. And at the heart of an inclusive environment sits diverse people. And that's when you're able to attract more diverse people who often bring the most innovative and creative ideas to the table. And that's the commitment. So these are some of, the benefits that we see. But let's then go a bit further and understand what are some of the ground realities that we kind of face in the region today. And that's also around the fact of, should D&I initiative just be an HR initiative, or should this be something that should be pushed way ahead on top as a strategic business imperative? So let's kind of unpack that a bit more further. So here is some interesting data that I've gathered across Asia, APAC, and Southeast Asia. And these numbers are quite interesting. As you can see here, is across all industries, women make up more than 50% of university graduates, but fewer than 15% sit on CEO or board level position. So there's definitely quite the disparity, quite the gap that we are needing to fill up. And not only that, we have about 58% of Southeast Asian companies reporting having DEI programs, while in comparison to a 96% globally. I'm not here to say that Southeast Asia or Asia as a whole is not doing enough. There is progress, but the reality is it is slower, right? And again, interestingly, we have 70% who felt that their abilities were judged based on their gender, and 43% believe they were judged by their race. Interestingly, in my previous experience within the recruitment business, I have had chance to interview thousands of candidates, and in that process, I have met people who have claimed that they have had to change their names so that they would get a better position in getting interview calls. I remember one young man saying that, oh, Naila, I had to change my name because my name reflected my race and my culture. And the moment, he was able to make a neutral name, he started to get a lot more opportunities. And also very interestingly, we have a global research that says that general population does understand that underrepresented groups are facing obstacles. While in Southeast Asia, up to 50% of us do feel that underrepresented groups are facing this. Now, having known this, interestingly, things are shifting, but it is on a slower pace. Now, what could we exactly do, and what has been missing? Because diversity and inclusion as an industry has been spent about $8 billion worldwide. And in fact, what has been happening is, where is the miss? What is not actually working here? Now, in terms of what's not working, as I mentioned earlier, is it enough just to have it as a business HR initiative, or should it be a more strategic initiative? Now, on that note, we do see from a lot of research that a lot of D&I trainings are not enough, and there is a huge gap. And then we do have research that says that classroom-based training alone has failed, and D&I requires a head-to-toe cultural commitment to ensure that all employees within the organization's experiences, opinions are heard and valued and considered, and just not represented on an Excel on an Excel sheet or a PowerPoint sheet where it's a one-way conversation. One can argue that diversity training and workshops succeed, because it does help in breaking stereotypes and encouraging empathy. However, after hundreds of literature review on prejudice breaking interventions, a duo, Pulk and Green, did find that the effects of workplace diversity training still remains largely unknown. And considering that, as I mentioned earlier on, corporates spend about 8 billion annually on diversity training, the evidence does suggest that the money is not being well spent. While business case for diversity and inclusion are strengthening as we go, but the progress is definitely slow. I'd like to bring in your attention to a particular example: unconscious bias training. This is quite a popular training that is done quite a lot of times. And I have been at the end where I have offered unconscious bias training, and where in reality, it has backfired. So the reality is, just training people on a particular topic is not enough to support diversity and inclusion initiatives. Now, for instance, one particular study showed that they did a research across 800 companies over 5 years of implementing such mandatory diversity inclusion training. There has been a decline in the number of demographic groups that is being represented. Now, the challenge here is training, as we know, faces some challenge in terms of implementation, training transfer, and the same holds true for training around D&I. The concepts of inclusion also generally tends to surround around self-awareness, self-reflection, and change of behavior in insights. And sometimes these opportunities are missed out just in training programs or perhaps in workshops. So a lot more is needed. Now, before I get into how we can tackle this, I have one more area of concern that does come across to really, speak on why diversity and inclusion trainings are perhaps not working. And that's because diversity without inclusion leads to continue a lot of inequities. What does that mean? We have an interesting study done by McKinsey that 61% felt that they were not being inclusive part of an organization. Example is, you can walk into a room and have a room filled with different looking people at the table. That's great, fair, diverse team, but that enough alone isn't enough. Each one of those individuals, whoever that across the table, if they do not have the voice on the table to voice their ideas and thoughts and feel safe about that, it's inequitable. And that's where a lot of times your diversity training kind of runs short. So diversity training alone cannot create a diverse and inclusive workspace or organization. Companies must also understand or address the inherent tension that kind of lies between the heart of organizations' desire to create an inclusive culture. And to feel wholly, employees require both a sense of belongingness and a sense of uniqueness at the same time. They want to be seen both as an individual and also as a part of a group. So then the question is, why inclusion matters? And as we can see, definitely a disconnect of having diversity up and roaring, but missing the inclusion piece. Now, what happens, in fact, without a bit more around this is feeling a perpetual feeling of being marginalized, lack of belongingness, and thus the commitment to the organization starts to deteriorate. And the continued inequities, for example, a lack of career progression for women or marginalized group. For instance, recently I was discussing with a colleague on maternity returnees. And that is a phenomenon where you have high potential women leaders progressing and thriving within the organization. And the moment they go off for maternity and they come back, they feel they are not supported enough. And this stands the piece around not having that equal opportunity. And also another interesting study shows about women leaders do have access or are aware of leadership development within the organization, say up to 50, but only 20% of them have access to it. So these starts, kind of picking up some of the systemic issues existence within the organization. And then why further? Inclusion matters. The moment when you kind of plug inclusion within the equation, you have high quality relationships with your group members, a sense of psychological safety, increased job satisfaction, and definitely a high intention to stay longer within the organization because you're feeling valued. You get to be the person you are, and also raise in organizational citizenship and commitment as a result of it. And definitely a boost in well-being because you are not feeling you need to work so much more harder than your colleagues and result in burnt out potentially. And also increase creativity because you get that breathing space to be who you are. And every single day you can come into work being yourself because you have a safe space where, being an inclusive member is possible. And of course, more career opportunity for diverse employees within the organization. Now, on that note, I'm going to take a quick water break. Archana, if you have any questions for me, please feel free to pop that.
So maybe, Naila, one question, there have been some questions coming in, but one question maybe we can take up right now is, if you can shed some light on what are some of the key roles that leaders can play to foster an inclusive culture, because I think that's a very important aspect because, the leaders and the executive teams have to own this as well.
Yes, absolutely. Good question, Archana. That's the next topic that I'm going to do a bit of discovery on. But I can take this on a quick note, just on a high level. Just as you mentioned, a few things that leaders can role model here is show that visible commitment to D&I within an organization, because ultimately it is a top-down initiative. If you don't see your leaders living these values, how can you inculcate that safe space for your employees to live through that? And another piece would be around, enabling and fostering effective collaboration. The more you collaborate, the more you open yourself to opportunity, to understanding differences and being in more diverse opportunities. And I think another key thing, this is my personal favorite, is to be curious about yourself and to be curious about others. And the moment you're curious about others, you want to know more where they come from. You want to understand their thinking. Where does that come from? Right? And this opens up, again, brilliant conversations, brilliant ideas, and paves way to innovation and creativity. And I think another big piece is, especially for leaders, is to build that awareness around their own biases. I mean, nobody is free from biases, including me. I can talk all day, all night about this topic, and I can have a slip of a moment where I'm like, uh-oh, I made a little boo-boo, right? So having that constant awareness about your own biases is also a fantastic game changer. And I think another one, I mean, I have so many, but I will end it with two more, is having humility. Because, getting into a room, you never know what is everybody's story in that room, right? And nobody know what your story is. So making quick judgments is not the best way to go forward. And last is to create or, foster that sense of cultural intelligence. And this kind of connects to the fact of being curious about different cultures. Yeah. So these are some of the, roles as a leader, perhaps one could do in order to kind of further, how do you say, catalyze the whole process and foster that inclusive culture within teams. But I would unpack a bit more as we go. Archana, I hope I answered that question.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to hold the rest of the questions.
Sure.
Go through the rest of it and keep them towards the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Now, on that note, let's do a bit of unpacking of how then, now we have kind of understood how diversity and inclusion benefits organizations. We understand what are some of the ground realities in Asia. And we also understand there is a bit disconnect, right? And I'm not here claiming that this is the only disconnect in diversity and inclusion, right? I'm not making such claims. I'm being absolutely upfront. This is one of many. But this is one that I'm here to share, and that's around how digital coaching can be that tool in your toolbox that can ensure that your investments around diversity inclusion is being spelled right. Now, on that note, let's take a step back to kind of bring everybody onto the same playing field. I'm sure everybody knows what coaching is, but let me just cement that thought once again. So coaching is a partnership process with a client to help them reflect on themselves, their situation, their context, and identify new insights, actions, and ways to unlock their potential to become the best versions of themselves. So it is a safe space. And in this safe space, you're reflecting who you are and reflecting and finding insights of how could you do things differently. And it's all, and you are empowered as an individual to build your own journey with the support of the coach, of course. And then the next question might be, then what is digital coaching? How different is it? Well, digital coaching, very much similar. It's not an AI or a chat bot you're chatting with. It's a human in a flesh and blood, a coach. Digital coaching is merely a technology-based live coach-coachee collaboration that is set in a digitally secure space involving both audio and video. And of course, because of digital coaching, it is able to be scalable. And also, it helps measuring outcomes for the organization and individuals, which traditional coaching did struggle and has been plagued over the years for being a soft initiative. But the digitization of the process has really opening up. Now, having spoken about this, how does coaching kind of come into the whole picture of diversity and inclusion? This is one of my favorite slides. And this is where, as you can see, in the top part of the pyramid, of how different learning initiatives land, or where more L&D or most L&D initiatives land in terms of lecture, reading, audiovisual content, group discussions, and so on. And right next to it, you can see the amount of information that is being retained by people. And where coaching comes in is at the below piece, where you're able to, maximize on your learning. So what happens here is you go in for a fantastic program on D&I, you get all these amazing rich information. And we do know, based on the forgetting theory, that say if you don't use or practice this information, you are in a spot of losing that in the next week. And we all have experienced this. We have gone on phenomenal trainings, being inspired, pumped, and wanting to do so much more. But the moment you get out of the training, you go back into your day-to-day work, you are buried with all the other important things. Now, then the question is, where do you have the opportunity to learn? And as I initially mentioned, there was a study that was done over 800 companies. They in fact saw after mandatory rollout of diversity and inclusion, there was a dip in fact. So now what we're trying to do is kind of glue those missing pieces. Now, in order to make any real change, prejudice reducing intervention need to be tackled at a mindset and a behavioral change level. And this requires an ability to understand our own and others' mental state. And this is usually called as mentalization. And it is what underlines overt or outward behavior. And this is what actually leads to actionable allyship. Now, what is allyship here? And why is it super important when it comes to diversity and inclusion, right? Now, allyship here means is a continual investment of time in supporting others, holding ourselves accountable when mistakes are made, apologizing, and being prepared to rework on the approach towards allyship as needed. Because diversity and inclusion is just not one training program you're going to take and assume that you're going to come out knowing everything and quickly change. A lot of our mindsets are culturally, innately driven. And this needs a bit more work. And that's where coaching facilitates, in that safe space where you're able to practice, where you're able to, in fact, share your own experiences through coaching. And ultimately, this indicates that diversity training is missing an important element, and that is the psychological safe environment for employees to immediately apply their learning from training into their personalized context and to be held accountable for implementing these changes. And the coach holds and supports the coachee through that journey. Now, having said that, let's see a bit more about how digital coaching really starts impacting diversity and inclusion. So, as I mentioned, coaching is a safe space. The coachee develops their own solution in that personal space that are tailored to their own respective context. And now diversity and inclusion might seem very different for every single person because of their varied backgrounds, how they've experienced. Some must have been at the receiving end, some must have been at the giving end, right? And another piece that really helps is in these coaching conversations, coaches become more self-reflective and aware of the unconscious biases, which I just spoke about earlier when Archana asked me the question, what are some of the key roles that leaders can foster in an inclusive culture? Now, coaching brings that awareness and allows individuals to see the reality from their own point of view and of the point of view of others. So it's a safe space. I can make mistake in this space. I'm not being judged, unlike I might when I go outside otherwise. And another piece, which is super, super important here, which is not mentioned on the slide, is for those who are on the call, I would like you to take a quick view of the past. Some of you must have already done in your careers different coaching programs, but look at the coaching pool. Look at how diverse your coaching pool were. And something that I constantly advocate, for instance, at Coach Hub, is you have a diverse team. So it is equally important to diversify your coaching pool. You cannot have 2, 3 is going to fit the bill for everybody. Because there are times when I am going into the safe space and I am not with my coach who I'm not comfortable to have that conversation. I would automatically edit that part of my life from that personal conversation with my coach. And that has a huge impact. That is reducing the impact that coaching would have otherwise. So it is super important. And the beauty of digital coaching is it allows the coachee to choose who their coaches are in terms of, it can be of a similar background, their age, their gender, their language, what time zone, when and how. So giving them a sense of control. And especially in this day and age when after having been through the pandemic where our basic freedom has been taken off, right? Now giving that back to diversifying a coaching pool is phenomenal to your employees. And now the last 2 pieces is around building that sense of belongingness and uniqueness, which I did mention earlier on, where coaching help creates a company or an organization in which both minorities and majority employees feel that they belong and they can be comfortable in expressing their own opinion, which minimizes conflicts and confrontation. It also boosts a sense of psychological safety, and that further starts having this trickle-down effect of improved well-being, employees feeling more empowered, more integrated into their own uniqueness, and more into the workspace, and consider them as bringing that value into the organization, walking down that room or door to work. I know I can come in my fullest form and I don't need to hide or leave that huge piece of me back home where I feel, oh, nobody wants to listen to me. Nobody really cares who I am. No, it builds that belongingness and uniqueness, which is super, super key. Now, having known that, where does it best work and where does it potentially can start for those who are keen? And that's perhaps helping leaders form this inclusive leadership style with coaching. And as I mentioned, it is a top-down effort, and which I will be talking more about as we progress. So what does digital coaching really help with building that inclusive leadership style? Well, definitely starts with leaders learning about their own business biases and assumptions and reflect those in a safe space. Once you're able to reflect yourself about yourself, you're able to appreciate and empathize more with the people around you and starting to build that empathetic approach to your team. Question their own attitude and behavior. Sometimes you work in workspaces where nobody questions your thoughts. It might not be acceptable or comfortable. And I think within this coaching space, that is possible. And last but not the least, develop communication skills, behaviors that support inclusive leadership. Sometimes it's great to have a sparring partner to try some of the interventions. And I would, in my past career, when I was this organizational psychologist, I would give a lot of feedback and recommendations to leaders of how start with your own team. Your own team is the best playing field where you can start your new adventures with your new initiatives on how to become a better leader. And you're going to get the best feedback from them. Now, what does it mean having inclusive leaders in the organization? We have data that speaks about with inclusive leaders, there's 17% more likely to have highly performing teams. Why? You have more psychological safety. There was an interesting study done by Google. They were quite curious to know what made high-performing, effective teams. One of the key ingredients was psychological safety. They also did another interesting study on what makes a best manager or good manager. One of the key ingredients there was coaching. And it doesn't end there. And we also know about 20% are more likely to make high quality decision. And also another study also mentions that inclusive teams are 2 times faster in making decisions because they feel highly collaborative, have better psychological safety. And that's reflected in the next data here. 29% feel more collaborative. And what's the bottom line here? It improves the perception of inclusion. And this increases work attendance and thus reducing costs around absenteeism. Now, we have talked about all of this, but what does it really mean when it comes to the organizational culture? We have been talking about having inclusive leaders, but what does it mean to have an inclusive culture? And I think that it is super critical that inclusion is supported across all the level, as I'm sure I've already iterated this point several times, and it is a top-down. And how this can be put in, and how potentially management can create such an environment that fosters inclusion and diversity. And that goes way beyond just having rules. Yes, you need to have systems and processes and policies that enable such behavior. But at the same time, inclusive leaders can serve as role models, as I mentioned earlier, some of the traits that they can exhibit. And mentor those around them in a way that they're able to facilitate inclusive experience amongst the organizational members, because that's a great thing a leader can give within their teams to make them feel safe. They can be themselves, they can risk, they can make that mistakes, and they're going to learn from those mistakes and not feel ridiculed for those mistakes, right? And also leaders at all levels can also directly enforce behavior that can support inclusive experiences and contribute to a climate of inclusion. Now, what does this exactly mean in terms of behavior and results within an organization? Now, inclusive culture begins with inclusive behavior. And what does that feel? And it feels, or it is the degree to which an individual feels a part of the organization's critical process. And how is inclusive behavior indicated? You have more work group involvement. You have access to information and resources equally, like everybody else within the organization. You have ability to influence decision-making. These are some of the indicators, right? But what does all these then lead to? Individuals feeling valued, having the sense of, diversity matters in a positive way. We do have interesting numbers that say, for instance, there was back in the day, I went through an interview process, and the first question I was asked, do you have any plans on starting a family? In certain countries, that is an unacceptable question to be asked, but in certain, there are no policies around that. Right there, I felt that was not an opportunity I wanted to pursue. And I'm sure everyone across or in our call has experienced this in some shape or form, maybe very unconsciously, interestingly as well. And then being involved and engaged in work group is what you also lead to from being more inclusive within organization. And I also mentioned this, of you bring that authentic self to work every single day and being able to influence, and you feel safe coming to work. So these are some of the areas that inclusive behavior can start represent within an organization. I'm going to take another quick water break before I go into the next section. And now I would do, as I mentioned, I would do a quick pit stop in Coach Hub's diversity and inclusion coaching framework. And you might see so many words out here, but what sits at the core of this is it is used to reflect on yourself, but also to reflect in how you engage with others. So this framework, it covers both internal and external perspectives. Now, for how we have done enough research around our framework, and we have reviewed several literature around these topics and built our framework specifically focusing on inclusion. Now, diversity and equity are still big part of this discourse, and these topics are also resembled in some of the 6 main buckets that you see here, and you will find them in the center. Now, each of these categories come with their own focus areas, and how this particular framework works is these focus areas are designed to help a coachee to dive deeper and explore where do they see themselves in regards to some of these key topics, and in regards to their own inclusion, and kind of unpack how they have experienced some of these areas within workplace, but also how equity and diversity is represented within their organization. So it tackles and it delves deeper. And the core 6 areas are belongingness, uniqueness, fairness, empowerment, commitment, and flourish. I wished I could take you all through more of this, but I'm being mindful of time, so I'm going to keep it crisp. Now, here is out of the 6, the 3 further breaks down. I like to club belongingness and uniqueness as they're worth looking together, because these components form inclusive teams. And as we have seen earlier, diversity without inclusive is unfortunately not a course that goes really far away. So therefore, inclusion really means that everyone at the table has the feeling that they can raise their voice, and that they know they have a voice at the table. And then this helps unpacking that. And fairness is more around the piece of equity. How equitable do you feel within your organization? Yeah. And then we have topics around commitment, flourish, apologies,
Yeah, sorry,
first task.
Naila, sorry to interrupt. I think some of the people are finding it a little difficult to read the slides, so maybe you'll have to just, I think text in some places is a little.
Okay, no worries. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste after when we take a quick break just now. And I hope that is okay. Apologies, everybody. Tech issues. And the last three components are around empowerment, commitment, and flourish. And flourish is more around the psychological element, psychological capital that helps people thrive within different uncertainties and so on. And then commitment has beautiful traits around growth mindset, grit, and goal setting to help you focus and thrive ahead. And last, empower. Empower is a nice one that once you start hitting all these buckets, you feel comfortable to stand up for yourself and to have that voice in that table and comfortably, and is driven by yourself. So these are some of the framework. As I promised, I would share that shortly on the chat. And as I mentioned, these are some of the traits that individuals as a coachee you would go through and get to explore in the Coach Hub's DEI framework. And along with that, we have curated learning nuggets because we understand the beauty and the importance of micro-learning to embed, as Archana earlier mentioned in the introduction, of giving that opportunity for people to enable. So between coaching sessions, you give them enough knowledge in different shapes and forms, be it articles, videos, in different contents, because we also understand learning happens in different formats for different individuals. So that is also key for that very piece. Now, having said all of this, I know I've given you a lot of bits and pieces around the whole huge, meaty topic. Now, what do you do? What are the next steps? Few quick tips here would be accelerate development for diverse employees. But that doesn't mean putting all your diverse employees into a room and getting them alone into a training. No. Diversity and inclusion should be a company-wide and organization-wide initiative, but with the view of giving opportunities and pushing so that you're giving equitable opportunities for more diverse employees within the organization. Creating a coaching ripple effect that develops the inclusive culture. Now, we have interesting research that shows leaders who are coached, their immediate networks feel the impact of coaching immediately. So how do we start building that then? That momentum is to then start finding those key influencers within your organization who has those big networks, who start influencing them. So then they start feeling the ripple effect of coaching, and it starts growing within, that momentum starts building up within the organization. And last, coaching should be a proactive and strategic force and democratize across your organization. And same with that, with the D&I at the heart of it. D&I initiative should be strategic, proactive, that should sit as a strategic initiative for the business and just not alone as another HR initiative that's run across the organization. Now, on that note, motivate, it becomes a model imperative for each one of us on this call, so that we are building a tomorrow where we are creating inclusive workspaces. It could be one of our family members, a friend, a neighbor, a child, a partner who is being discriminated or who is being taken away that possibility of growth. So I urge every single one on this call in some shape or form, to take that one step ahead in supporting to build this culture, to push this momentum. There is a lot of momentum, and I think we all in this call in some shape is responsible as fellow human beings and perhaps people of people within organizations to drive this. And on that note, thank you so much. And for those who are still on this call, thank you so much for having chatting away my thoughts. And I am happy to take any further questions you may have. And also please feel free to type away any key takeaways so other audience members can also draw inspirations from that. Thank you.
So Naila, thank you so much. I think that was a very, very comprehensive masterclass on digital coaching and leveraging that for DEI. We do have a lot of audience questions, but first one, very quick and easy. Somebody in our audience wanted to know if you'd be able to share a copy of this presentation with them.
I would be
So
more than happy. Shouldn't be an issue.
wonderful. So
Yeah.
we'll make sure that you get a copy of the book of the
Yes.
presentation. My bad. So sorry. Okay, so here there are two questions I thought, and I think maybe I would like to club those two questions.
Sure.
One is, one part of the question is around, what are some distinct differentiations between vanilla coaching and digital coaching?
Okay.
And the second part, which is actually two different people have asked this, but I think they go together, is that and I think you talked a little bit about the ripple effect a little earlier, but maybe if you could share a little more around this in terms of when digital coaching is more one-on-one, how can it become so, a pivot in changing the organization's DNA around DEI?
Absolutely. So for the first question, you were asking what's the difference between digital coaching and traditional coaching?
Correct.
Okay. Digital coaching and traditional coaching both involves a coach and coachee in flesh and blood. That's common for both. What changes is the virtual space. It's definitely the geographical distance between the coach and coachee. And of course, the use of AI to maximizing its potential in supporting insights for the coachee and the organization. So that's one of the main distinction that digital coaching brings in comparison to traditional coaching. And digital coaching also helps in scaling so much more faster, especially for those global accounts where we have, you're rolling out consistent coaching programs. In traditional coaching, you would have to recruit coaching in different regions, which can be a nightmare. I have been there, I have done that. And for those on the call who have done that, how can that be? Regional rollouts can be a challenge, but digital coaching makes it so much more easier because, for instance, we have 300 plus coaches worldwide in every time zone, and we make different languages available. And we give that opportunity for the coaches to make that selection. They can choose which time, where, when they will have that conversation, who their coaches are, which age group, gender, all that. This was not possible with traditional coaching, because traditional coaching, what would happen is your HR team would have clustered down few of the coaches within who is available in that vicinity or in that city, who's able to commute. Now, this means also traditional coaching cuts down on the investment around room booking, logistical administration, and so on. Whereas digital coaching can happen on your mobile phone, to your laptop, to your desktop. There are so many more, but I'm mindful of, again, time.
Maybe I'm sure people can reach out to you offline,
yes,
Naila, for
please,
more
please
inputs.
feel.
And please feel free to reach out to Naila if you have more detailed questions. There's one there's one question, and I think it's a little long, so I'll try and keep it shorter.
There was, I believe, one more question with the D&I piece. Sorry, I've not answered.
Yes, that's the one.
That's the one. Okay.
Yeah. So it's from Alra, talking about, the perception that DNI, the concept of DNI originated in the US. So how relevant do frameworks around DEI work in our culture across, specifically APAC, is where we are,
Okay.
we have our audience joining us from.
Absolutely.
And, are there separate frameworks? Because, obviously in the US, the cultural racial mix is very different.
Absolutely.
Here we have, people from different cultures, communities, also nationalities working together much more than you have probably in the US. So how does that differently happen? I do have some points, but love to hear from you.
Yes, that is a meaty question.
Yeah.
Okay, that is so relevant, right? When we speak about, especially in our culture or in Asia, and Asia is such a diverse culture in itself, right? It has so diverse people, languages, and yet it was something that had to come from the West. I would have loved it would have started from our region, because that's where the richness sits, right? Now, having said that, ultimately, I wouldn't say, when it comes to people, irrespective of race, how people are discriminated I think there is a commonality in that. You may be discriminated by the way you look. Now you can, for instance, look Asian, you can look African, you can look Latino, but you look different, right? So what's there? You look different. That's the discrimination. And I wouldn't say, irrespective of wherever we come from, diversity and inclusion frameworks is based on human interactions and behaviors. And I think that is, in a sense, it would be wrong for me to say everybody feels the same. No, we all come from different backgrounds and so on. But what triggers us can be bucketed. Like, for instance, some of the key pieces around this framework is universal, right? And what we do when we start talking about D&I, we start taking a consultative lens. So I did mention, and I saw a comment earlier, how did the unconscious bias training frame Fireback? So this is an example. So there was this training that was run in Australia. Fantastic. What happened? We replicated the same thing in Singapore, and it backfired because we didn't do the calibration.
Yeah.
We didn't really understand who our audience was. So that is a big thing that we need to speak about diversity and inclusion. The reality is some of the concepts are not still fully grown in APAC as a region. We are still in the progressing phase. For example, LGBTQ is a very sensitive topic. But this is constantly run, but then it still comes back into identity, right? So, and on pieces around that. So I think answering to the question is, it's always to go around the consultative piece, understanding the organization and making sense of what some of the organizational drivers are. I wouldn't say there's one cookie cutter that fits everyone.
Well, thank you so much, Naila. And if I can add, the basic core philosophy of D&I, I think stays the same everywhere in the world,
Absolutely.
right? It's about, celebrating diversity of it's not limited to physical features, right? It's also thought, it's also experience, it's also, it can be age, all of that. And then you have, equity, and you have an inclusive culture where you're celebrating that diversity and you're actually providing an equal opportunity for all.
Everyone.
So, and what those, sort of components of the entire framework change, like Naila is such a great example of, what worked in, because the cultural calibration was different. What was important in that context in Singapore was different from Australia. So I think that if you look at it from that lens, this is a big focus area today in every part of the world, organizations, and even while we talk about culturally from different parts of the world, even within organizations, your D&I structure will not exactly be the same from any other organization also.
Absolutely.
So just wanted to add that perspective as well,
Thank you.
Naila, and thank you so much. It's been a wonderful session. We have some great, comments from our audience. It's been very insightful, informative. People are really looking forward to a copy of your presentation as well, Naila.
And I'll make sure it has the clearer version of all the subsections, and apologies everybody on that. Yeah.
No, I think it was working absolutely fine when we did the dry run. For some reason, when we went live, there was a bit of an issue. But we'll have that to you, and thank you so much. Please feel free to reach out to our expert, Naila. She shared her email ID as well. If you have further questions, because we couldn't take all the questions today, yes. I have some more that came in. Have a great day ahead, and once again, thank you for all your time. Thank you to Coach Hub and for enabling this session to happen today as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Archana. You've been such an amazing host.
Thank you. You've been more amazing, but I had the easy job today, but thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.